All right, so we are getting started on our third of four Econ Career Alumni Chat series, so welcome. We're gonna kick it off and welcome our amazing alums that are here tonight to chat. And so what I'm going to do is we have two amazing alums, one's in Chicago, one's in Denver. So I'll just go ahead and have them introduce themselves to kick this off. So Abe, if you wanna get started and share your name, the year you graduated and kind of what you studied while you were here at UW-Madison, and then your position title and company that you're at.
Yeah, so my name is Abe Berkeley-Vigil. I graduated in 2010, but I'm really part of the class of 2011. I work at a company called StoneX, and I'm a quantitative analyst. I think that covered all your questions, right?
I believe so, yes, good job. Okay, Kyla, over to you.
Hey everybody, my name is Kyla Middle, and I graduated in December of 2017 with an economics major, and then I did the math emphasis option as well, and I also got a French certificate. And I currently work for the state of Colorado under the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, and my title is an Executive Assistant and Special Projects Coordinator.
Awesome. Thank you for those introductions. The titles and the companies, I'm sure students are already like, what do you do? I want to learn more. So we'll just kind of go right into that. So Kyla, if you want to continue chatting and highlight what are some of the key projects or duties that your role oversees? So basically like your main responsibilities. And does it relate at all to what you learned as an econ major?
Yeah, so my department is called Serve Colorado, and we I guess our main mission is to promote volunteerism and national service in the community, and specifically as a solution to meeting community-based needs that other local governments or nonprofits are unable to meet on their own. Specifically, this also incorporates our AmeriCorps program. So our department manages all the AmeriCorps programs for our state. That's one of the main things that we do. So my job directly, I don't deal with our AmeriCorps programs. I kind of do all of our other projects outside of that. So half my title is an executive assistant. So probably about 20 to 25% of my job is just being an administrative assistant for our office, just doing regular administrative duties, helping out the executive director. And then the other 75% of my job is the special projects coordinator aspect. So one of the main things I do is I do a lot of grant application review. So our department is a state funder for nonprofits who want to host AmeriCorps programs. And so I am on the committee of people who reads all of those applications and gives funding recommendations for that as well. I'm also the main point of contact for a small planning grant we got. So a planning grant is just a super small amount of funds used to create a program. And so we recently were awarded a $20,000 planning grant, and I am the point of contact on that. And what I'm trying to do is do outreach to some tribal governments and organizations here in the state, and helping them create a program proposal to engage their youth in service and volunteerism. Some other things that I do do a lot of communications work. So I manage all of our social media accounts, our website. I help with recruiting AmeriCorps members and promoting our open positions throughout the state. I also am the point of contact for days of service. So we have 3 days of service here in Colorado, and I am the person that kind of spearheads that initiative and promotes it, organizes it, tries to find out what volunteer opportunities are available through local nonprofits. So I wouldn't say that there is necessarily a direct overlap between what I studied / my coursework and my day-to-day job duties, but I will say that my way of thinking and processing information was definitely impacted by studying economics. So I frequently ask myself during my work, like, what are the incentives? What's the expected utility? What's optimal? What's sustainable? How do players interact with each other in terms of like game theory thinking? And so that critical thinking lens has definitely impacted my day-to-day job.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyla. You have so many like diverse like duties, and especially I thought it was cool that you're like, yeah, I give out all this money for grants. Like you're holding the purse strings in some ways. So that's awesome. Abe, how about you? Can you talk a little bit about some of your key duties or projects and how it relates to econ, and if it does?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a quantitative analyst. So that pertains to trading. So what I do is I do basically like statistical research and data analysis, and also write programs that relate to the products that we trade. And in terms of things that I've worked on, some of the things I've worked on have been like developing or modifying trading strategies, coming up with ways to calculate like P&Ls for trades, other metrics that if someone wants me to get like more in the weeds with, I could, but I just don't want to lose people. But basically just a lot of like analytics that surround trading. And I use a lot of statistics and machine learning in order to be able to do that. In terms of how that relates to what I learned in terms of my economics degree, in terms of like the hard skills that I'm doing like on a day-to-day basis, it's definitely a lot more oriented towards like statistics, which I know there's like some overlap with that with regard to economics, but particularly kind of similar to like what Kyla stated, it's more about a way of thinking. Like what are the opportunity costs of this trade or of any decision that we could potentially be making, trying to have an understanding of like literally I can see what other people are doing in the market. So having an understanding of what other people are doing and why they're doing that. And also what the effect would be of things that we do when we trade. So I guess you kind of say that's a little bit, kind of like game theory to some extent, but, just having the idea of like, is what we're doing optimal, kind of cost benefit analysis to like everything that, every decision that we make. That's kind of, it's not like I'm like doing like drawing supply and demand graphs or something like that, but just kind of having that way of thinking is a lot of the conversations that I have with like my manager and the senior trader kind of use a lot of the language of economics, I guess is the best way to put it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And you decided to kind of continue your education too. So you've gone to graduate school. You have, I think, 2 different master's degrees. Is that right?
Well, yeah, now I'm in a third one. So I've been in
school.
So, yeah, I got an MBA from UIC here in Chicago, and then a master's in computational finance from Carnegie Mellon. And I'm currently getting a master's in computer science from DePaul in Chicago. So
awesome. What was kind of your decision-making points for that? Like for each, degree or program, was there like, were you hitting some sort of like ceiling and you're like, okay, I need to go back and learn more? Is it more of just your love for learning? The employer maybe helps you pay for it. I don't know.
For the last one, it's the employer helping me pay for it. So I just figured if they're going to pay, there are definitely areas of computer science that, I learned programming as part of my master's of computational finance, but there's other things that I could have gone like more in depth in that a computer science degree will allow me to do. And because the employers are paying for it, it's like, why not, in terms of the first degree that I got after Wisconsin was an MBA. I've kind of had like a very long and winding road to getting to like where I am right now. I initially wanted to work in the restaurant industry coming out of Wisconsin. And a lot of that actually was because of kind of like how I was thinking about things in terms of an economic sense. So, when I was in Madison, I actually kind of wanted to open like a donut food cart because at least when I was there was like no donut place on campus. And I was like, oh, like supply and demand, like there's no donut place, like this will probably do great, and open it up on Lincoln, mall or whatever. And so, I didn't end up doing that, but I ended up just kind of working in restaurants along the way. And then my goal was to kind of like open up like a fast casual restaurant at some point in my life. So I was like, if I get an MBA, I can really understand business and, all aspects of business, maybe go into like restaurant consulting so that I can kind of build up capital over time and then start my own business. But along the way, I started taking finance classes, which I'd never done. And I was like, oh, you know what, this is actually really capturing my interest. So I, found myself always talking to professors about topics in finance. I'm like, I know there's more out there. So for the jobs that I was looking for, I needed to get, have a stronger math background and computer science background. So I took some courses that allowed me to go to Carnegie Mellon, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
Cool. That's awesome. I mean, just even it's a really great example of how you can have certain interests at a certain point in time, and then you get exposed to something and it totally opens up maybe a new pathway. I know that I talk to students about that a lot in career advising, is they say, well, I don't really know what I want to do. I'm like, just try things that you're like interested in or curious about. You'll learn a lot and kind of go on from there. So you kind of answered the question a little bit about like, how did you figure out what you wanted to do after graduation? I'm going to come back to you though, because I want to ask Kyla a little bit more about that. Like, yeah, how did you figure out what you wanted to do after graduation? You know, were there experiences in high school or college that helped you figure out that you wanted to be in Denver, or that you wanted to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I guess ever since high school, I've always knew that I wanted to study econ. And beyond that, I always knew that I wanted to work in government. And so I kind of had that focus and that thinking going through school. And so when I was in college, my senior year, I got an internship in the Wisconsin State Capitol working for a state representative. And so that was a really good experience. I did that for 2 semesters, and it was, I think that was kind of what solidified wanting to work in state government for me. I was just working with constituents and doing minor office duties, but I spent a lot of time talking to the actual aides that worked in the office and just kind of picking their brain on why they were there, what they liked about the job. And so just talking with them and hanging out with them really made me want to kind of pursue that as a career for myself. And also, I would say volunteering, which is great because I work in a state department that promotes volunteering. But truly, I volunteered all throughout high school and college, and it really impacted me because it sparked a passion for direct service and me wanting to feel like I'm making a positive difference in the community. And in my previous job, I worked in rental assistance. So basically, I would provide housing vouchers to people experiencing homelessness, and I worked for a nonprofit. And so that really was kind of a direct tie to my previous volunteering experience because I got to have that direct service aspect. I got to see the direct and immediate impact of the work that I was doing in the community. And so now that was a great stepping stone to my job now, because now I'm kind of at that state level where I can hopefully make a broader impact on more people at one time through the power of volunteerism. But another thing was my study abroad experience. And that really made me want to pursue a long-term career in kind of the international sphere as well. And because of that experience, I did end up taking a lot of other economics related courses that had that international lens. So I took international trade. I did the economics of healthcare, where my research paper was on the economics of the healthcare industry in Germany. And so I that kind of helped me shift a little bit and narrow down my focus and my scope to what I wanted to do.
Cool. That's awesome. So in addition to doing a lot of different things in your role, you're also like have had a lot of experiences to help you figure out maybe what you liked and what you didn't like. Abe, how about you? Were there, it sounds like you had a lot of restaurant experience and that was kind of leading some of your decisions, some of your future path post-graduation. Anything else that kind of helped you figure out what you wanted to do or helped define your career goals?
Not really. I mean, I'd always kind of like heard podcasts about like quants and stuff like that, especially because when I was in school, it was around the time it was actually like during the peak of the financial crisis. And so there was a lot of kind of information going on around them because a lot of people kind of like blamed the financial crisis on like quants and stuff like that. And so, I mean, just kind of like listening to podcasts was like just kind of something around it. But in terms of like work experience, it really was almost to some extent kind of like an accident that I ended up where I was. I knew I always wanted to do something that was like where I was thinking about things in some sort of quantitative sense. I guess while I was at school, I just didn't exactly know how or where to apply that. But that's the benefit of like, going through life is you end up realizing, you kind of have an idea of where you want things to go, but you don't really know how to get there. And so I initially thought the restaurant industry was somewhere where I wanted to go, but just kind of along the way, I found something that I enjoyed more.
Cool. Are you
Yeah.
still thinking of opening up like a donut cart or a restaurant at some point? I mean, I know you've kind of taken this other trajectory, but is that still like a goal at some point?
Not really. I mean, I guess like if one day I had like free time or something, just open like an Italian restaurant that I could go with my family to or something like whenever I want. But it's not like a career goal at all at this point or anything like that. Yeah. I'm just more focused on, just trying to stay on the current path that I'm on now.
Very cool. So a question that Autumn put out here, and this is kind of aligns with another question that I was going to ask. So Autumn's thinking the right questions here. What should students be doing in college to be competitive for internships or jobs in your field? So is there specific coursework that you're like, oh my God, I wish I would have taken this in undergrad? Are there leadership opportunities that maybe your organization looks for? I know, Kyla, you're talking about like, volunteer, but tell us about like what makes a candidate kind of stand out in your field. So Abe, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. Something that I guess I just didn't really have a sense of when I was in undergrad was that, just going on like LinkedIn and looking at job descriptions and just seeing, what are the job descriptions asking for. So when I finished at UIC, I was interested in a lot of like trading and quant jobs, but I saw that, a lot of them were saying like, you need to know C++, you need to have taken like linear algebra and differential equations. And I'm like, I don't have these classes under my belt. So what I did in between my MBA and my master's of computational finance is I actually took those courses at UIC so that I could apply to one of those programs. And the only reason why I knew that was because both searching what the programs were asking for, but more importantly, I was caring about what those programs were asking for because I saw what the job descriptions were asking for. So, I mean, that, the whole point of school, there's like the social aspect and meeting people or whatever, but ultimately you can do that doing anything, so like what's really important is like you're trying to get a job coming out of school. And so, if you have like a career that you're interested in, try to figure out what jobs are in that industry and then just find job descriptions and be like, how many of these boxes can I check off essentially? And, you want to ideally be able to check off as many of those boxes as possible. The industry is telling you what they want, by those job descriptions. So don't try to like fight the current. Like if that's a job that you want, then take the classes that kind of align with what, that company or generally that industry is interested in.
Great, thanks. Kyla, what do you want to add in?
Well, this is definitely a question that you were going to ask later, I think. So I can just say what I had thought of. But so for me, I would recommend participating in at least 2 extracurricular activities that are directly related to your professional interests. So for me, I was part of Women in Economics. I was part of ESA. I was part of the Fed Challenge. And I think that just like, aside from getting that direct experience, you're now connected to a community of people that share those same interests and can have conversations with you about those topics. And so I think that that's really important, especially in just like an academic setting outside of class. Another thing that I would recommend is commit to a specific focus area. And it doesn't have to be something that you pursue forever, but the fluidity of the economics degree is kind of both a blessing and the curse in that way, where it's so broad that you can do a lot of things with it. And it's not like you're locked into one specific career path, but at the same time, it's kind of like it can be overwhelming looking for jobs in that way. And so I would recommend just kind of deciding and really thinking about what areas or even what industries interest you most, and then take coursework that's more focused towards that. So for me, I focused on, like I said earlier, international relations and government as an example. And then one thing that I would recommend now and also throughout your whole career is to keep a list of any special projects that you've done. And then maybe like compile a portfolio that demonstrates those projects, because in an interview or when you're applying for jobs, sometimes like an online application will be like, okay, upload any additional documents you want us to review or like supplementals to your application. And that could be really helpful. Like for my current job, when I applied for it, I uploaded a list of projects and trainings that I had accomplished at my last job. So I think that that's something small. I mean, obviously you have to keep track of that information, but I think that could be really valuable, especially if you're preparing, for an interview or something, or reading through job applications. You can easily just reference this sheet of like, oh, do I have that experience? Yes or no. And then, so I had mentioned earlier that I did the math emphasis option with the econ degree. I would recommend doing that if you have any inkling at all that you might want to go to graduate school for economics. Just because, and obviously math is a very desired skill in the workforce. And so I know it's not for everybody, but like specifically if you're thinking about going to grad school for econ, I would definitely recommend considering that option. And then lastly, network all the time, constantly be on LinkedIn messaging people. Seriously, it is such a huge and valuable skill that you will need in the workforce. And you never know who you're going to meet that's going to have a really good connection for you that could change the course of your career. And so just starting to practice that skill now is going to be really helpful for you. And it'll make you learn more about the industry and your potential career interests.
Yeah, I think everything Kyla said is actually 100% right. Like, I mean, she really hit all the key points there. I know, like, for example, with regard to like the current program that I'm in, my computer science program, one of my TAs like got like an internship at Google because she did like something called like a hackathon, where it was like an extracurricular event that like pertained to coding and stuff like that. And so she said that was one of like the things that like really interested them in her. And yeah, the only thing is like, it's definitely great to network and to, reach out to people on LinkedIn, but sometimes people reach out to me, and I think there's like a right way to do it and like a wrong way to do it. If you're just reaching out to someone and just being like, hey, I see you work here, can you just refer me? And there's like nothing else really to the message. Like I just got one of those the other day, and I was like, I really don't want to help this person because I feel like I'm just like a tool essentially to this person. You want to introduce yourself, be cordial. Don't make someone feel like they're just like you would just like shoot it to anybody, and just say like, hey, just try to refer me. I have no idea who you are, but please just refer me, basically. Like, there's a like probably working with like your academic, advisor or whatever, or career advisor, maybe you try to work with them to construct something that would be like a lot more, a more refined way to like make an entry to someone on LinkedIn. Like always sound like you're trying to learn or open, to whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think you both are talking about networking. So I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that and talk kind of, you were mentioning, Abe, like kind of the right way, the wrong way. I guess like when someone reaches out to you, I guess, what do you what should a student expect to like have a conversation about it? And at what point, if someone wanted a referral or wanted you to pass their resume along, like what do you feel like is a good way to do that?
I mean, I think just something that's kind of like, well, one, I would really try not to, I mean, Kyla might have different views on this, which is totally cool. But for me, I really I want to get something from somebody who I at least have like some level of connection with, like whether they're a Wisconsin student or a Carnegie Mellon student or someone who is at StoneX, someone who's like to some extent in my network, even if it's very loosely. Like the guy who messaged me the other day is like from Cornell, and he's like a master's of like mathematical finance, which is basically the same version of my computational degree, but other computational finance degree. But otherwise we have like no connection, so it's like, try to find someone who you actually feel like there's some connection between you two. So it's not just like I said, like you're not just like shooting out an email to basically like anyone out there in the world would be one thing for me. So, and then try to lean into that connection, be like, like for example, if you were to email me, say, hey, Abe, I saw you at the talk, I'm really interested in a career in quantitative finance. And I'd be open to learning a lot more from you. Like, do you have some time to talk, or would you want to set up a time to talk? As opposed to just like, hey, I saw there's a position open at StoneX. Please just refer me. You know, I have no idea who you are, so help me out with that. And I'm like, okay, I really don't want to help you out with that. I have no idea who you are, you know. So, you know, like, always sound like you're open, willing to learn, flexible as well. You know, they're the ones who are helping you essentially, because they're the ones who are in the position that you want to be in. So, and, you know, just be very understanding, and just know that a lot of the people who you're going to send stuff to are probably not going to respond or whatever. And just, you know, that just comes with the territory. And, you know, just, you know, try to make like a genuine connection, I guess, is the best way to describe, to sum up what I'm trying to say.
I agree with all of that. I think finding a common denominator is super helpful. And there are so many Badger alumni in this world that I'm sure you can find one of them to reach out to regarding your interests. I know I personally have done that a lot. What was I going to say? I think that, you know, similar to what Abe was saying, I would say, you know, like, invite them out to a cup of coffee or something and ask about their background and, you know, where they grew up and stuff like that. Not just, oh, informational interview, let me just like interrogate you about your job. And kind of just like getting to know them as a person, exactly going back to what Abe was saying about establishing a genuine connection. And it is a skill that takes practice to get really good at. And so don't expect it to work out all of the time. As Abe was saying, you're going to get a lot of people that don't respond to you, and that's okay. But just kind of putting yourself out there. And I know for me, I've had students message me on LinkedIn just out of the blue, and I love that. I love to hear from people, and most people feel that same way. If you reach out to them and you're genuinely interested in them and what they do, it's going to be a lot more likely that they respond because they like talking about their experience. So, but yeah, and you know, I would even say, like, be ready to just kind of like give an elevator pitch about what your career interests are if the opportunity ever presents itself. Like, you never know who you're going to run into randomly where you're going to have to just kind of talk about what you're looking for. And also finding somebody who could make like an email introduction or something for you could also go a really long way. Again, going exactly back to what Abe was saying about kind of finding common ground and that common denominator, and not just kind of like randomly talking to somebody for no reason, or that like you don't know at all or whatever. But if you have like even like a parent or a teacher or literally anyone who has another connection, if you just ask, you know, like, hey, I saw you were connected to this person on LinkedIn. Are you comfortable giving me an introduction to them or something? Because if you have a mutual introduction like that, it's way more likely that that person is going to want to talk to you and find time to set up to talk to you.
This is great advice. I love everything that you both are saying about networking, you know, about like reach out broadly, but have that kind of common interest and denominator. Not everyone will get back to you. That's something that I, you know, sometimes I work with students and like, well, I reached out to 2 people and they didn't respond. You know, it's like, okay, well, maybe reach out. I usually say, start with, you know, 5 to 10 people. You might get a 50% response rate. That's kind of what I say, like on average, you might hear back from about 50%. Not that that's grounded in any sort of actual statistical analysis, but just my kind of overall guess from when I reach out to people. But that's even how we found a lot of the folks for this alumni chat. Was I'll look up and see who are some of our awesome alumni working in specific fields or industries and say, hey, I think students would really like to hear from you and hear about your career trajectory. So yeah, having that genuine interest, having that enthusiasm goes a really long way. And yeah, usually alums are like more than happy to talk about their experiences, share information. It's just a great way to like learn about an industry, and it might lead to an opportunity, but even if it's just learning more about an industry, that can help you be more prepared and, you know, better for when you're applying, when you're interviewing, those sort of things. Okay, so the next question is.
I also see that there is a question that came in the chat.
Yes. So there's two, and it's a little bit more about like majors, I think, but I'd love to pose both of these to you, or pose both the questions to both of the alums and see if you have any insight on this. So Lubna asks, I'm interested in data science. Do I need to pursue a master degree, or having a certificate in the field will be enough? And then Aya asks, how do you recommend we pursue the econ major without the math emphasis in a way that would still be desirable for employers? What would you recommend we pair that with? So kind of this discussion of like, is an econ major enough, or is an econ major with some sort of certificate enough? Love to hear your all's thoughts.
Well, I can go ahead and start with that. The second question that came in, Abe, I'll let you take the first one about the master's degree. But I guess like I am interested to hear you potentially elaborate on that a little bit more, because it's hard for me to say one way or another without knowing your professional interests. Because I mean, I think that an economics degree by itself could potentially be desirable for employers. So like, can you elaborate on what you're getting at, or a little bit more?
Sorry, do you mind if I unmute?
Go ahead. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I was just I'm kind of in a loud environment right now, so I'm sorry about that. But I was just thinking, just since I've heard you guys talk so much about like the economics major with the math emphasis, it just seemed like that one seemed like I guess the better option in terms of like employers like looking at candidates. So just because I'm not super like interested in the like a math emphasis, that's not really my thing, but I am super interested in the econ major. I was just wondering if, like I'd need to find something else to like make myself just as strong of a candidate as people who are strong in terms of like statistics and like the computer science side and the math side.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful context. Thank you. I apologize for giving that impression. That was not the impression that I wanted to give about the math emphasis. I was just speaking from my own experience. But for example, I personally am very interested in going to graduate school to get a degree in public policy. And so that would be an example of something that you wouldn't necessarily need the math emphasis in. And so I think kind of going back to what I said earlier about kind of picking a focus area or a couple focus areas that you're interested in, and then taking coursework or joining organizations that kind of reflect that interest is helpful. And I think just like taking coursework that's genuinely interesting to you and doing those extracurricular activities, I think is enough to make you a desirable candidate in the labor force for sure.
And I'll just pop in too. I put some of this information in the chat, but in case attendees are missing it. So a fun fact is that about 75% of our students just do the general econ track, but a good percentage of our students do like a double major or a certificate or something like that. So pairing econ with something else that they're interested in, and that can be based off your interests, right? So only about 25% do the math emphasis. And really, I tell students like that's most beneficial for if you're wanting to get a master's or PhD in econ, or maybe even another quantitative area. Abe could probably tap in on this too. But usually, unless it's like a very quantitative or data heavy role, the math emphasis isn't necessarily needed. But if you love math, then go for it too.
Yeah, and also I think to answer your question is, this could be a good time for you to think about what certificate you might want, because that could be a good supportive credential without getting another major or something like that too. So I don't really remember what all the options are, but like kind of shifting your focus area towards that and having that be reflected in a certificate could possibly be helpful too.
Great, thank you, Kyla. Abe, what are your thoughts about kind of these questions about majors, about masters in data science? There is, I don't know, Abe, if you're familiar, but there is a new major at UW-Madison focused on data science. So econ students could double major in econ and data science, or I believe there's also a data science certificate.
Yeah, in terms of majors, I guess, and I hope this doesn't sound like too harsh or something like that, but I mean, I think what you really want to put in terms of like how you're thinking about getting a job is, at least, I was going to school like 10 years ago. So, like maybe things have kind of changed, but at least the way that, I think I want to think about things now would be like, what do employers want from you? Like what makes you unique to them and what makes you valuable to them? And so, if you have like a student from like University of Wisconsin and a student from Illinois, who both have like econ degrees, part of the benefit of the math thing is that you have a little bit extra. Now, that's not to say that you can't get a job if, you have like the same econ degree as like a U of I student or something like that, but you just want to think like, what am I doing to stand out? So if you're not interested in math, there's a lot of like, even I think LinkedIn or other things, like I think you can get like a certificate in something like, if you're doing something with econ, there's a good chance you're probably going to be working on like Excel or something like that, which was something that like when I was at University of Wisconsin, it just so happened that like none of my classes happened to really use Excel, and I was terrible at Excel when I graduated. So like that's a like hard skill that you can kind of like get if you could get some type of like online certification for that or something like that. Like sometimes your education has to go beyond the classes, and you have to include that and highlight that in like your resume, or your cover letter or whatever it is. So you always want to be thinking, I guess the point that I was trying to make is like, when I was going to school like 10 years ago, I kind of thought like, all you need is a college degree and then everyone's going to hire you. And then, it's like, well, it's the Great Recession. Nobody's hiring anybody. So, what that as a result kind of like always left me with like the mindset of like, okay, what am I doing to make myself stand out relative to like the thousands of peers that graduate with me every year? And so, there's definitely like, again, think about the industry that you want to be in. And also, what are ways that you can kind of augment like your skills so that you're, like I always tell people, you want to be as day one ready for the job as possible. That's what employers want to see, because it's expensive to train someone and stuff like that. So whatever skills you can get, whether they're at Wisconsin or beyond that, to kind of make you day one ready and make you different than everybody else is like really important. So, it might just be that, you go into something where like just taking a series of economics classes is like exactly what that employer wants. I'm not saying you have to go out and like get some Excel certificate or SQL or some other programming thing. It's just really having an understanding of like where you want to be and then work backwards from there is more what I'm trying to say. And then to answer the other question about like data science related stuff, you definitely don't need to get a master's in data science to get the jobs I was looking for, but particularly if you want data science jobs, in my experience, like an econ degree is not going to be enough, just because every day your work is going to involve programming. So, you're going to need to take like programming courses. And, I think you're only required to take, or at least when I was there, you only were required to take like one statistics course to go into data science. You're going to want like, a couple of courses in data science or in statistics to really prepare you for that. But I mean, again, that's kind of like, what are these jobs asking for? And you'll see in the job descriptions, like, what do you need in order to be able to be like best positioned for that? So you don't need a master's degree. It's just a lot of people get a master's degree because they didn't realize that they needed those skills while they were in undergrad. And then they're like, okay, well, I got to make up the deficit, so I'm going to go get a master's degree. But you could graduate and do like a very data science oriented job if you had those skills just out of undergrad.
Perfect. Thank you both for the insight on that, because I think it's great to hear the insight from alums, right? Say like, oh, this is what I would have done, or this is, what my thoughts are on it now, versus like, yeah, when you're in school and you're in the middle of it, sometimes it's hard to know like, well, what is my next goal? Well, I'm just trying to get through this semester, right? It's almost finals time. We have some other great questions that have come in. So Anne has asked, in terms of internships, was there a sense when you were applying for full-time work that past internships had to be super relevant to the positions you were applying for? Did you have any internships or professional experiences during undergrad that were similar to what you were doing? So I guess like, did you have internships? Did it translate into what you're doing now? Or how were you able, if not, like, how were you kind of able to talk about it in a way that it was transferable to your industry?
I would say this also kind of depends on what your professional goals are. Because I think for some for some jobs, yes, they might look for past experience that's directly relevant, but for a lot of jobs, I think it's more about the skills you learn in that position rather than do the day-to-day job duties match up. So I personally would think about internships as a way to kind of test the waters and see what you're interested in, what you like, what you don't like, and also use that as a professional development opportunity to build some hard skills at the same time. And so for me, the internship that was most directly related to my current job is obviously my internship in the Wisconsin State Capitol. But do I think my current job is similar to what I was doing there? Not at all. So, but it did spark that interest in me and kind of solidified my goal of wanting to work in state government. And so I would say I think it's more of like a learning opportunity and a chance to develop skills rather than am I just trying to get hired by the same organization or like trying to get hired into a full-time job that is the exact same as this or something like that. And then for Trevor, for your question, I would say if you're trying to work as like an economist or work for the Fed, you have to have that math emphasis. That's not negotiable. And ideally some like policy experience too, I would imagine. I'm not 100% sure, but that was kind of my inkling based on the research that I did when I was looking for jobs.
Yeah, I think it also depends on, there's a lot of different roles in the Fed. So like if you're looking for more of like a research assistant position in the Fed, typically, yeah, they're going to want you to have had some maybe research or policy experience. Probably math emphasis would be good because a lot of those people that are thinking of getting a research assistant position at like the Federal Reserve banks, they're also maybe thinking they want to go on to get, you know, a master's or PhD, maybe in economics, right? But then there's also different positions in the Fed that are a little bit more, I guess, like operations based of like just like how things are run. So almost more like kind of business related positions or bank examiner positions and things like that. For those types of things, those types of roles, I don't think the math emphasis is as needed, but still I think an understanding of, you know, the banking industry, even if it's, you know, I've talked to students who are like, yeah, I worked as a bank teller back home for a summer just to kind of learn a little bit of the industry, just to kind of get my foot in the door. So I guess don't discount work experience, even if it's not called an internship, it's still definitely skill building. And I think, you know, Abe and Kyla, or Abe and Kayla are both kind of talking about those things. Abe, what are your thoughts on some of these questions?
I haven't, because I didn't want to get like distracted, so I haven't read the other ones yet.
Oh,
but,
that's okay.
And I can answer the one with regards to like the internship though that you had asked earlier.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So I think I probably sounds like I'm like beating a dead horse here, but kind of like how like I think like our grandparents or great grandparents were like their mindset was shaped by living during the Great Depression. Like my mindset of everything is shaped by like being in school during the Great Recession. So, you know, in terms of like how I viewed things, it was very difficult to get an internship when I was at Wisconsin. But what I noticed is the people who did get internships that were relevant to the field that they ended up working in, on average, were about 2 to 4 years ahead of their peers. Now, why do I say 2 to 4 years? A lot of people ended up having to like go back to graduate school or something like that to be able to get the jobs that they wanted to do. Or a lot of people took jobs that really didn't relate to anything that they'd studied and eventually made their way over to something. But I mean, that was like kind of the power of having internships, is it could put you like basically like 2 to 4 years ahead of your peers. And so that's why, you know, they're hard to get, but that's like how powerful they are. Now, in terms of always having something that is in the specific thing you want to be working in, people understand that internships are kind of opportunities to explore. So, you know, not everyone's expecting every internship to necessarily be relevant. To some extent, an internship is like a seal of approval. So for example, like let's say you got an internship with like, let's say like JP Morgan, and it's not, you know, exactly like, you know, in the exact area that you want to be working, it to some extent is like, if it's on your resume saying like JP Morgan thinks I was good enough to be hired or something like that, you know. So when you apply to other places, it's kind of like you have like JP Morgan's seal of approval on your resume to some extent. And, you know, I completely agree with Kyla that like, I think there's kind of like a push and pull with things, or in terms of like what people are interested in, it's like, you have to think of it on like a multi-dimensional level. So to one extent, it's like, what are the names on your resume? But to another extent, it's like, what are the skills that you acquired? So you can kind of offset one or the other, you know, depending on what you have. So for example, like if you have like some amazing name on your resume, it's going to be really good, you know, getting you a position somewhere. But if you don't have an amazing name, but you've learned like a lot of really good skills and you're able to successfully highlight that in both your resume and like a cover letter or just any interaction that you have through networking, you know, like always present your like, you know, best self, your best skills. That can kind of offset maybe not having something that's like as relevant or as big of a name on your resume or something like that. So that's why I said you kind of have to think about things kind of like in a multi-dimensional sense.
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
So this is like kind of tangentially related, but I would say one of the number one skills that you can have that will apply to any job that you want to apply to is, are you proactive? Are you taking initiative to learn certain skills, to take on certain projects, to step outside of your comfort zone a little bit and learn? Are you teachable? And for me, I have been really it's kind of always in the front of my mind of like, what new skill could I be learning right now through my job? And so every job that I've ever had, I've requested that they pay for certain professional development courses that I'm interested in, and every time they've done it. And so it's kind of like, because they want to see that you're willing to learn and to be proactive for those things. And so I think if you can present yourself in that way and you can say, look, I've gone above and beyond, I've been proactive in these ways, then that at times and for certain positions can be more important than just checking off all the qualifications in the job description. And so that's kind of my piece of advice that I wish somebody had told me when I was a student, is just always be looking for what new skill can I be learning right now, and how can I take advantage of my current situation in order to like build and develop these new skills.
I love both of those pieces of advice that you provided. A few things that I wanted to kind of add on to it. So regarding internship programs, so basically for most employers, the purpose of an internship program is because people who do well in that program, they can then be converted to full-time hires. So there are some industries where, you know, like investment banking and consulting, that there's a huge conversion. So students who do the internship program are oftentimes converted to full-time positions, either at that specific bank or maybe another, you know, bank or consulting firm snatches them up. But for the majority of fields, you know, there's oftentimes not internship programs, or the internship program is just to be able to expose students to this field. So I think thinking through too, like what Kyla and Abe are saying, of like learning about the industry and what skills are needed, or looking at job descriptions and seeing, hey, what kind of things are needed, and continuously figuring out, how can I build some more knowledge in this area? How can I build more skills, right? If it's through a class, perfect. If it's through software training through Do It, you know, that's free for students, great. If it's a leadership position, great, right? And so, you know, or if a job even, you know, I worked with a student who was really interested in kind of like operations and supply chain and things like that. He was a bartender at the Nitty Gritty, right? And was like, okay, I make really good money here. I don't really know if I want to like do an internship and lose out on this. And so I said, well, you know what? Nitty Gritty has several restaurants in the area. There's someone who does all of the purchasing, the operations, you know, like figure out who is that person, and maybe you can start having conversations with them to kind of learn about it, or even take on an additional project or something like that. So Kyla was saying that kind of as well, of like showing initiative, showing interest, you know, because people don't always know what you're interested in unless you tell them about it. Okay, so we're getting kind of close to the end here. And so we talked a lot about like networking was a good way for finding, jobs and internships. What other strategies and resources have worked for the two of you in finding your roles?
I would say outside, I think networking is huge. But outside of that, just strategies for, I guess these are more strategies for like applying for jobs. I know this is probably not what you guys want to hear, but learn how to write a good cover letter. And that could be the make it or break it on whether you get invited to an interview or not. And that was the case for me with my current job, which I found out after the fact. But it really don't underestimate that skill. But in terms of finding jobs, I usually look for jobs in two ways. One is I just search kind of general industry buzzwords or keywords that I think that I would be interested, like public policy or government or like something like that, where it's broad, but it narrows down your search a little bit. And then you can kind of, as you're reading job descriptions and looking through available opportunities, you start to see, oh, yes, I'm interested in this, or oh, no, I'm not interested in that. And can kind of weed it down further. The other thing that I do is I look at people who have those jobs that I would like maybe further down in my career, and then see what their prior experience was. So I kind of reverse engineer it a little bit, where I'm like, oh, this person is a director of a nonprofit. What was their prior experience and education that got them to that point? And see if there's some overlap between people who hold those certain positions. And then that gives me a better idea of what my next stepping stone could be.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that other than Kyla mentioned, like make a good cover letter. I also think it's very important to have like a very clean looking resume as well. My resumes were like always a mess until I got to Carnegie Mellon. And then they have like a standard like resume that they make like every student do. And I was just kind of like freestyling. And, it really conveys like important information and it's well organized. And, you just don't want something that like looks gross and then like the HR person just throws out your resume because it looks like they can't figure out what the relevant piece of information is. So I'm sure there's people at Wisconsin who can work with on that. I didn't know what I was doing, so I never did that while I was at Wisconsin, but I think that would have been very beneficial while I was there.
Yeah, and Abe, I know you're talking a lot about kind of the Great Recession, everything like that. I feel like before that kind of time period, like the School of Business and engineering had a little bit more robust career services, but I think kind of one of the positives from coming out of the Great Recession is that consumers or students were kind of saying like, hey, what's the return on the investment of my degree, right? And so career services has hugely been built up since then. And so Econ students have our own Econ career development office now, and I've been putting some links in the chat for that as well. But yeah, we have 2 full-time career advisors. We have a peer advisor who's had some investment banking internships that can kind of advise on that industry. So yeah, we've definitely kind of like bulked up our services. But even I've been in higher education for, a little over 10 years. And I've definitely seen that that's a big part of coming out of kind of, I think, the recession, of saying like, hey, what is the college offering to me, not only for a degree, but other ways to kind of get prepared post-graduation, whatever that next step is. So I want to briefly talk a little bit about interviews, because that's a common question that students have coming into career advising. When I'm meeting with students, they're like, oh my gosh, I have this interview. It's higher view, or it's 3 people are going to interview me, how do I prepare? So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what do interviews look like in your field? And what advice do you have for students in preparing for interviews? So Abe, maybe if you want to take this first.
Okay. I had seen this question, so I actually came slightly prepared. Hopefully you can see my screen. But these are 2 books that I use for interviews. One is called A Practical Guide to Quantitative Finance Interviews. The kind of like shorthand for that is called the Green Book, as you can tell because it's green. And this one is called the Red Book, but its actual name is Heard on the Street. Unfortunately, quantitative finance interviews are extremely technical and very difficult. There is like an endless amount of rounds in a lot of places. So for example, I know at like a trading firm here in Chicago, Transmarket Group, they have like 11 rounds of interviews. And what makes them so difficult is the questions that they can ask are really broad reaching. So, I mean, one of my classmates at Carnegie Mellon was asked to derive the like first fundamental theorem of calculus. And it's like, okay, well, he hasn't looked at that since high school. So he had no idea how to do that. But I mean, in terms of like the most relevant things that they ask, it usually pertains like linear algebra, a topic that maybe a lot of you haven't studied, but you know, if you're looking at these fields, something called stochastic calculus, which is like calculus for random processes. And then a lot of what they ask you are like programming questions pertaining to like algorithmic programming questions. So topics would be like dynamic programming, but also just basic like programming stuff like how do you manipulate arrays or stuff like that. So they're very math oriented and very programming oriented, and they're also very difficult, but you know, it is a field that's usually highly compensated. And so that's kind of, I guess, their justification for making it so difficult. I think the process is ridiculous, but you know, it is what it is. And then what I try to do, just as my final piece of advice, I hope I'm not taking up too much time, is I know that these crazy questions are coming. So to some extent, I sort of try to run out the clock by highlighting what skills I have or things that I've done that I think they're trying to get out of by like asking me these questions. So if I can kind of like control the interview by just like dropping a bunch of like statistical or machine learning knowledge and projects that I've learned, they don't have to ask me like random statistics or machine learning questions because they've already gotten that from me. So I think that's an important thing to know for these types of interviews as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Abe. And I not apologize, but I'm sorry that, you know, those interviews are so intense. When I hear about those processes, sometimes like I just like roll my eyes. I'm like, come on, seriously. But yeah, I guess they kind of figure, well, we got to make sure that you know your stuff, or they just kind of like it from a stress perspective of to see how you kind of handle under stress, maybe.
It's like hazing, basically, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's like fraternity hazing, but it is what it is if you want to work in the industry. And you just know going into it that that's just what the situation is. Not every place is like that. They want to scare people, but a lot of places are like that.
Yep. Kyla, what about the types of interviews you've had, advice for students to prepare?
Yeah, so for my current job, I had 3 rounds of interviews, and they were each with like different members of the current team. And for my last job, I had 2 rounds of interviews, which were with like a panel of like 10 people. So it was me versus 10 people, all asking me questions, very intimidating. So my first piece of advice is you got to read up on the company, and more specifically, the people who are going to be interviewing you. Like you got to know their background. And also it helps to kind of like milk it a little bit and like kind of get that camaraderie right off the bat. And then hopefully they'll be a little less hard on you during the interview process. And a fun fact, one of the ladies I interviewed with for my current job is also a Badger. So that was fun. And kind of like a lot of the things that I already talked about, but like if you don't think that you're a good candidate, focus on how you can make yourself seem excited and teachable, because a lot of companies are looking for that skill and just want you to be excited about it. And then I put this in the chat too, but my resume writing tip is that you should think of your job or experience duties as a way that you demonstrated a certain skill, and then put that skill on your resume rather than like the day-to-day job duties. And then remember that when you're interviewing for a job, you're also interviewing them and making sure that it's going to be a good fit for you and not just the other way around. And so I would really consider what are the most important things to you in a job outside of just like salary, because there's a lot of other pieces of a job that will make it enjoyable or not. And so thinking about that ahead of time is important. Like what type of work culture are you looking for? What type of management or leadership style are you looking to work under? What other additional benefits are you looking for? And so, you know, I wouldn't just look at the salary and make a determination based off of that. I mean, obviously it's fine to have standards in that area. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying that there's other questions that you can ask them during the interview process to make sure that you're actually going to like working there and it's going to be a good fit for you too. So yeah, I would say that's my advice.
And I feel like right now too, we're in a point where for a lot of industries, they're having a hard time, hiring people. And so it's also important that, that at least in some areas, you do have that power. You have that ability to say, like, if I'm going to be spending, 40, 50, 60 hours or maybe more a week here, is this a good fit for me and for my growth and my development? Because your first job is, likely not going to be your last job, right? And you guys both have had some transitions there. So we're at time for this evening's career chat, but I just want to thank you both so much. Amazing advice. I'm excited to see Abe's donut cart maybe sometime in the future. But yeah, I just love all of the information that you gave. I think it's been super helpful for the students. If there's any other final pieces of advice, you can put it in the chat, or yep, Kyla put her email address there if you're willing to kind of chat with students if they have questions. But yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, students, for coming and spending your evening with us. I'm going to put one last link in the chat, which is the link to the final career chat. So next week, we're having our final career chat. We're going to have one alum who's working at Oracle, which is a technology company, and then another alum who's working at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. So for folks that were kind of interested in working maybe at the Fed, that would be a great session to attend to. So you can see the information and register for it on the link that I shared there. But thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. And for the students too, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.